Chris Stapleton's All-American Roadshow. July 25th at Old Idaho Center Arena with special guests Alan Stone and Nikki Lane. Pre-sale for City Card members now through Thursday at 10 p.m. before the general public Friday at 10 a.m. Buy tickets at livenation.com. New album Higher, available November 10th.
Today on CityCast Boise, late night phantoms in the Boise State Comms building, devious disturbances at the Old Pen, and a haunted elevator. We're resharing our chat from last Halloween with Julie Sarasqueta, who knows Boise's haunted history inside and out. Quick note, this episode does include some violent imagery. It's Monday, October 30th. I'm Emma Arnold, and this is what Boise's talking about. I'm so excited to do a fun little special Halloween episode with you. So let's just get right to it. Why do you believe in ghosts?
I can't remember a time when I didn't believe in ghosts. It's just something that's always seemed very natural to me. I've always been probably a little bit too morbid and a little bit too obsessed with death and the occult and things that are hidden and unknown. And, you know, I was raised Catholic, and it is not too much of a leap to go from exorcisms to ghosts. So I think that probably had something to do with it.
I love that. I wasn't raised religious, but a few times as a kid, I went to a Catholic ceremony and I was like, oh, so many rituals, so spooky. Like I loved the, the day-to-day stuff. So have you personally been haunted yourself? Have you been haunted before?
I would say that I lived with a ghost. I did that in college for 2 years. My roommate and I lived with a ghost in Missoula, Montana. And it was an interesting experience. It was a benevolent ghost. Like didn't do anything too scary. You know, it would be like hearing somebody come up the stairs, and there is nobody there. Or I remember one time, it was probably like 2:00 in the morning. And my roommate and I had doors that faced each other, rooms that faced each other. And we both woke up to this really loud knocking on our doors and came out of our doors at the same time. And we're like, what do you want? But neither of us had knocked on it. You know what I mean? It was just, we just had some interesting things like that, items like falling off shelves. And yeah, it was an interesting experience.
I love that you're in your closet telling me this story right now. It just really, it feels like we're at having a sleepover telling ghost stories. I love it. It's very great. I heard you mention on another podcast you saw a ghost out at the Military Reserve Cemetery. Is that true? Can you tell us about that?
I did. Yeah. Yeah. This was several years ago. At the time, I was training for the Sawtooth Relay, and so I was getting up at like 5:00 in the morning before the sun came up, and I would run over there by the Military Reserve. And one morning, as the sun was coming up, and I was coming up on the reserve cemetery, I saw the figure of a man walk from the cemetery and cross the path, and then walk into the sagebrush and disappear, and scared the crap out of me.
Yeah. Did you feel any malevolence coming off of him, or he was just out for a morning stroll just like you?
Yeah, no, I just felt like he was completely unconcerned with me and didn't take any notice of me, and just went about whatever his otherworldly business was.
He's also actually training for a relay, interestingly enough.
Exactly. He's the elusive volunteer for the Sawtooth Relay.
What's your favorite Boise ghost story, whether you believe in it or not?
The ghosts out of the Old Pen. There's so many stories out of there, and it has such a violent history, and it really is kind of depressing. It was such a depressing place to be for so long. I mean, obviously always a prison is, but just the conditions were really terrible. And so it is just ripe with ghost stories.
I've always thought that. I remember being on a field trip as a kid and them showing us the hanging room and telling us the very disturbing ghost story that goes along with the hanging there. I forget the man's name, but
yeah, Raymond Snowden was his name.
Yes, Snowden. Yeah. That's right. Them telling us that story, and I remember sort of being like, "Hey, we're 10. We're 10-year-olds. Like, this is so dark, And it's such an interesting field trip to do with children, because now I've done it with my own kids a bunch of times, and it's like a very bleak field trip that kids are like running around and eating Lunchables, and then you're like, yeah, so 75 people were hanged in this room. It's like, oh my gosh. Okay, kids, back on the bus. So for the people who haven't heard the Raymond Snowden story, will you tell us this ghost story?
Yeah, it's really gruesome. Raymond Snowden was a man who encountered a woman named Cora Dean at the Hi-Ho nightclub in Garden City, and this was in the late 50s. And he stabbed her, and it was an incredibly violent death. So he was arrested, and then he was put into the, very recently constructed cell block 5, which was where the death row inmates were held. And his jail cell looked at the gallows that he would be, hanged in, about a year from when he was put in the prison. But the thing is that, compared to other places like, say, Texas, Florida, Oklahoma, Idaho really has not executed that many people over the course of its history, which is kind of bonkers to think about. But we also don't have a good track record of being good at it. So when Raymond Snowden was sent to the execution chamber and hanged, they didn't quite calculate, I don't think, his height and weight correctly so that he would have a clean death. And then the entire place is kind of known for having all sorts of weird phenomena, like opening and closing doors and drawers and cold spots. And when you go out there, it is a little bit, it's beautiful. Like, the building is kind of imposing and beautiful, but also really kind of terrifying to think about the conditions that these people were living in.
Yeah. My record label wanted to find like a unique, interesting spot to do my next album taping, and they had suggested the Old Pen, and I was like, no, no, because I know I've been to shows there. It is really beautiful. I've been to wonderful, fun shows there, but I was like, no, I don't think I want to take that energy with me on this taping. I don't think I feel like comfortable doing, comedy out there, but it is a really beautiful spot.
Jason Mraz and the Super Band. Live. The mystical, magical, rhythmical, radical ride. Saturday, August 3rd at Ford Idaho Center Amphitheater. Jason Mraz and the Super Band. Tickets on sale now at FordIdahoCenter.com. Jason Mraz and the Super Band. Pick up the new album, Mystical, Magical, Rhythmical, Radical Ride, produced by Live Nation.
So when you were a reporter at the Idaho Statesman, I heard that you investigated a story of a ghost that supposedly haunts the old communications building. What happened to you when you tried to write about it? I heard that you had to book it. You had to leave.
Yeah. So at the time, Jean Huff, who is now the editor of the Boise Weekly, we worked on the Futures Desk together. So we were both interested, still are very interested in ghosts. And so we went to the communications building. We were invited to stay the night there. We didn't make it through the night. We totally psyched ourselves out. We couldn't do it.
I love that.
So we went with this group that at the time was called Idaho Spirit Seekers. I think they've been kind of absorbed into another ghost group here in town. But they came with all of their equipment. So, the story behind the ghost in the communications building is that the comms building was one of the first buildings on campus, and it was originally used as the student union building. And the student union building had a ballroom. And according to the legend, there was a dance there one night, and a young woman was stood up by her date, and so she went and I think the most common legend is she hanged herself. So eventually, when the student union ballroom was broken up into classes, people started noticing things. But it sounds like, from what I've been able to research, people didn't really start talking about a ghost until the theater arts students moved into the building. So, which makes sense. Yeah. Drama students love ghosts, love superstition. Yeah. So it makes a lot of sense. And, there were all sorts of stories about Dinah, like as the theater students were creating like scenery, there would be ghost footprints left in fresh paint, things like that, sounds, students would try to talk to Dinah. The story I heard about why she has the name Dinah is because somebody was, talking to the air, like, come at me, ghost. And an entity started playing Someone's in the Kitchen with Dinah. And so that's how they figured out that that's what her name was. So anyway, I don't know if any of that is true. However, I mean, there's no record of a young woman hanging herself, in the student union ballroom or anywhere close to it. But it is kind of like a creepy place. I remember when my husband was teaching there, he was actually asked to teach in the student union ballroom because another professor asked to move her class because she felt so uncomfortable teaching in there. So there is something to it, whether it's all in our head or whether, does it really matter if you feel scared?
Yeah. I asked my husband because he used to work in the editing bays there. And I asked him, did you ever feel anything? And he was like, nope. And I was like, well, that makes sense, honestly. I feel like a ghost could be sitting on his lap and he would just be trying to look around them to see the screen. So
yeah, exactly. Either you're a believer or you're not. And if you're not a believer, then really any of this phenomena could be chalked up to something else, right?
Sure. And that's why I say about me is like, I'm not a believer, but I would never say Bloody Mary 3 times in the mirror. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm not a believer, but I'm not a non-believer. I'm going to be safe. I'm going to be safe out there, basically. I'm going to be careful.
Oh, yeah. I slept with my hands like inside the covers until I was probably like 15 because of Bloody Mary. Like I really took all of that seriously.
Oh, yeah. Better safe than sorry.
That's right.
When it comes to ghost is my theory. What do you think that's about? What is that?
So I think when there are a lot of stories throughout history that kind of reflect attitudes towards women and, just the general patriarchy and how women are perceived. And, for much of human history, women have been perceived as victims. But, our ghost stories change over time. So it could be that in the future, 100 years in the future, a ghost from, a ghost story that starts in this era maybe won't have any sort of like victimhood attached to it. But, we won't be around to find out. Or maybe we will. I don't know.
She became a ghost after girl bossing her way to the top. That's progress,
that's right.
People.
something like that. But they're all it's all really culture-bound beliefs. Like it really changes decade by decade. Like when was the last time you heard about a hitchhiking ghost?
Oh, that's so true.
When I was growing up, it was all hitchhiking ghosts. But nobody hitchhikes anymore. So so our ghosts are evolving as we evolve.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I like that. Which kind of brings me to my next question. So many of Boise's historic buildings are disappearing or getting changed drastically as the city grows. And I'm just wondering, a lot of the places where our Boise ghosts maybe we're connected with, like we're kind of at risk of losing those stories, right?
Yeah. And, ghost stories are part of the fabric of what makes a place a place. And so when we don't have those anymore, or like say when newcomers don't learn about them, do they effectively go away? I don't know. But it is a shame to see so many beautiful old buildings, either gutted or torn down. And then, I guess that brings up the question, do you need a physical space to experience a ghost? Like the hitchhiking ghost, right? Is that reflective of, the kind of the turbulence of the late 60s and 70s and searching for something? Are the ghosts that we experience from this point in time in Boise, are they going to be different? Like maybe they won't be attached to a certain place, but, maybe it'll be a roving tech worker in like a black Columbia jacket. I have no idea. Like, we'll find out, I guess.
Yeah. That makes me think of the funeral parlor across from Flying M that got torn down. Is that the Gibson?
Yes.
Is that right? Like, do the people who now live there, do they connect to that? Like, oh, we live above this spot. Because when I was a kid, that was a very haunted spot. I mean, Gibson closed.
Right.
And, we all used to go peer in the windows. I actually got my first headshots ever done at the Gibson.
Did you?
I just loved that. Yeah, I did. It's funny. I got it in front of the flower entrance. So it says flower entrance, but the way I'm standing, you can't really tell what it says. So people used to make guesses because it just has like the end letters. But I loved that space. I loved that building. I was very sad when it got torn down because I felt like it was such an iconic historic building.
I would hope that, when people move to Boise, that they learn a little bit about the history here, because it is really fascinating. Idaho in general is an odd place to live. It's unique, I think, in a lot of different ways. And the history has a lot of really odd and fascinating things, and it's worth knowing. So I hope that they manage to learn a little bit about the history of what used to be there.
I have a friend who lives in the Idaho, and like the Idaho and the Owyhee, for years when I was a kid, like those were very spooky, haunted places because they're both former hotels and both, supposedly fairly haunted. What do you think is about these places that sort of create these stories or create ghosts?
Well, I think that that hotels are always ripe for ghost stories because they're kind of blank, transient spaces. And so you can really project a lot of what you're thinking and feeling onto a blank room, but also just because of the sheer volume of people coming in and out. Like, of course, in a historic hotel, they're going to have a lot of ghost stories, right? Probably the most famous legend out of the Idaho is about the elevator. I'm sure you heard about that, how the elevator moves up and down itself. And depending on who you talk to, that's either a bellhop who got murdered or like a long-term worker. You can take a lot of different stories from a hotel and kind of smash them into a great ghost story.
So if we meet a ghost, if we have a run-in like you did when you were out jogging, what do we do? Is it like a bear? Do we clap and make some noise so they know we're there? Is it a gorilla? We don't make eye contact. Like, what do we do when we see a ghost? What's good etiquette?
I love this, like a viewer's guide to ghosts. I think that probably ghosts really don't give a single care about the living anymore. So just, leave them be.
Leave them alone. Yeah. You hear that, Boise. Let them do their ghost stuff. Stay out of their way.
That's right.
Julie, this was such a delight. Thank you so much for telling us your spooky ghost stories.
Oh, no, I had a great time. Thank you so much for inviting me. I appreciate it.
That's all for today here on CityCast Boise. If you enjoyed the show, check out our Hey Boise newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more local stories from around the city. Bye.